So a few people yesterday were surprised that I lined up with the workers that are trying to unionize Amazon and Alabama. Let me get this right. So Amazon gets to be the most woke corporation on the planet. Every day they're proving their wokeness, right? Banning books, not allowing traditional charities to participate in Amazon Smiles, denying President Trump access to Amazon Web Services and denying his campaign. That every day, get messages about how woke Amazon is. That's fine. I have no problem with that. Be as woke as you want. The problem is that when it comes to tax cuts, then they want our help. When it comes to, they're trying to unionize us, so we might have to pay workers more, then they want our help. If you have a union problem, if you think the taxes for corporations like yours, the biggest in the world, are too high, well, why don't you go get your woke, liberal, leftist friends and have them help you? Here's the bottom line. It's very simple for me. The largest, richest company in the world and a champion of wokeness that all it does is beat up on conservatives versus hardworking Americans who just want to get paid a little more and have better work conditions. It's an easy.
Thank you, Mike. This last month has seen a significant and indeed a dramatic change in our country, and not a change for the good. This past month, we have seen the rise of the woke corporation. We have seen the rise of big business enforcing a woke standard. It's always been the case that big business wants to get in bed with big government. It's always been the case that big business seeks handouts, seeks subsidies, seeks special benefits at the expense of the little guy, at the expense of the small business. But in the past month, these woke corporations have decided to become the political enforcer for Democrats in Washington. They've made the decision to get in bed, even at the price of spreading disinformation. What prompted this legislation being introduced was Major League Baseball's decision to pull the All-Star game out of Atlanta, Georgia. It did so based on a pile of lies. It did so based on an assertion that legislation the Georgia legislature took up to protect voter integrity somehow disenfranchised Georgia voters. That is demonstrably false. The legislation Georgia passed expanded early voting in Georgia. It also required identification to vote. I would note, Major League Baseball, if you go to a game right now and pick up your tickets at the will call ticket booth, they'll ask you for identification to vote. So Major League Baseball understands the value of identification, and they apparently don't think they're being bigoted racist when they ask you for a driver's license to pick up your tickets. But they decided to play politics with voting and elections in Georgia. Joe Biden similarly spread partisan lies about the Georgia law, so much so that the Washington Post, hardly a right-wing outlet, the Washington Post predictably leans left, predictably leans Democratic. The Washington Post fact-checked Joe Biden on the Georgia law and gave him 4 Pinocchios, their worst rating for spreading partisan lies about it. And Major League Baseball's decision is indefensible on the merits. They made a decision to pull the All-Star game out of a city that is 51% African American and move it to Denver, a city that is 9% African American. I would note also that the new Georgia law gives Georgia voters 2 more days of early voting than Denver allows. This was not about voting. This was about virtue signaling, and this was about punishment. Major League Baseball made the decision that the more than half of its fans who happen to be Republicans are now disfavored, and that voter fraud is not a concern legislatures should focus on. That decision was harmful. It's going to hurt baseball. But it also underscores that there's no reason Major League Baseball should enjoy special subsidies, corporate welfare that no one else gets. As Mike Lee explained, Major League Baseball has had an exemption from the antitrust laws for nearly 100 years. It was made up by the U.S. Supreme Court. It's been in effect nearly 100 years. The other major sports leagues don't enjoy that exception. The NFL doesn't have that exception. The NBA doesn't have that exception. Somehow those sports leagues manage to do just fine. But baseball gets this very special carve-out. of corporate welfare from Washington. They don't have to play by the same rules everybody else does. And we're standing here today to say Major League Baseball should have to play by the same rules, and if they're going to play partisan enforcer, they shouldn't expect to see special goodies from Washington when they are dishonestly acting to favor one party against the other, and doing so in a way that is hurting thousands of small businesses in the city of Atlanta, many of which are owned by African Americans, thousands of African American workers in the city of Atlanta who are hurt by Major League Baseball's woke, dishonest decision that we're standing against.
I wish Major League Baseball would learn the lesson from this, to not make a rash decision, to make informed decisions, to read the bills before they make judgment. This movement in this country about wokeness has got to stop. We can disagree on things, but let's base it upon facts. What I really want to have happen here is not the people who have been hurt, the small businesses, but more importantly, every single one that stood up here, the entrepreneur that risked everything. They would tell you it wasn't about them. They're more concerned about their employees. How do they help them? They put a lot of plans, they put a lot of investment into that week. And for a lot of people that get an all-star game, that's Christmas for their business. That helps them go on to other months. I think Major League Baseball should find a way to make it up to this community, because they made an uninformed decision and they harmed a lot of people who are out of work and could have made overtime, could have been able to make investments that they were missing, especially after COVID.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you recognizing me for the 5 minutes. Questions for the entire panel. I know that Senator Toomey had a question about capitalism versus stakeholder capitalism, and I'd add to that woke capitalism that seems to be running amok throughout the financial institutions of our country. It seems like you all are very comfortable picking winners and losers, specifically those who signed the letter in opposition to Georgia. That would be Bank of America, Citi, Wells Fargo, and Goldman Sachs, picking winners and losers in certain areas, especially in election law. I just want to understand your position on that very important law, because I, as a Southerner and African American who's voted in the South all my life, would hate any form of discrimination, anything that restricts voting rights. What part of the Georgia law restricted voting rights or was discriminatory? Any before they signed the letter?
Senator Scott, our company signed that letter based on the input from our ESG committee and our teammates about how they felt when the law came in. In our view, as a company, we believe that there ought to be a concerted effort to get the status standards that we can all agree to, because all of us, and including what you just said, is the access for people who are eligible to vote is paramount to having a great democracy. So it came out of our teammates, like we make a lot of these decisions, expressing grave concern. And so
let me just because I understood what you said, Mr. Monahan, and I appreciate your comments, but my question is, what part of the law was discriminatory? What part of the law restricted? If you're actually increasing the number of days of early voting, if you're actually codifying a law, drop boxes that were not a part of the law, if you are actually making it easier to vote but harder to cheat, what part of that law was discriminatory or restricted access? I've been studying the law, and that's one of the reasons why I asked that question, because from my perspective, and frankly, from the words on the paper, 20-pound paper, maybe not worth much, but those words are very powerful. It did not prevent anyone from voting, and frankly, made it easier to vote earlier. And I just am dumbfounded by what the answer to the question was. Yes, we support capitalism, but the stakeholder capitalism or the woke capitalism seems to be running amok. And I say that because I can't find anyone who will answer the question specifically, giving me any examples or specific provisions of the law that we don't support. But at the same time, we will discriminate, it seems, against industries that we don't like. And that's where that stakeholder capitalism comes into play, because banks benefit from a number of explicit and implicit government protections and subsidies, all backed by U.S. taxpayers. So if it is legal and constitutionally protected, the Second Amendment, why would you refuse to bank companies that are in the industry. That I don't fully understand. So it seems like picking winners and losers in companies, and you're diving into choosing which laws you want to uphold and which laws you find offensive, but you can't articulate a position on why those things are offensive. It just seems confusing to me that one would say, I support capitalism, but I'm doing these things that are inconsistent with the statement that I support capitalism, and then I cannot articulate a single reason why I would not support, why I oppose the law in Georgia, or why I oppose funding or financing the oil industry or manufacturers of guns. I just find it to be disheartening as a former member of some of the institutions, as an account holder and a member of others, why it is that you all have taken such a strong, clear position, but can't or won't articulate the reason for that position. Well, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the time and have a good day.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator Warner from Virginia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to litigate the Georgia law with my my good friend Senator Scott from South Carolina, who we've worked on a lot of projects together. But I would start with the fact that the Georgia law that makes it illegal for someone to voluntarily give somebody a glass of water if you're waiting for hours and hours in line to vote runs counter to any kind of basic notion of fairness in American democracy. And, you know, there are a host of issues that I think why reasonable people, not just from civil rights organizations, but from business organizations across the round, have said, you know, in the era of 2021, cutting back on voting rights should not be how our country ought to be moving forward. I want to pick up on some of the questions that Senator Van Hollen said, and I've talked with most of you guys and know you. You know, I'm not, you know, I don't come in with a immediate bias against you, but I think we got to put up, you guys got to help put up more than you have. The wealth gap in this country should scare the hell out of all of us. How you guys have come through COVID, and you know, and I would argue part of that due to some of the Dodd-Frank reforms. Well capitalized, you've come through well. We lost 440,000 Black businesses last year. We've seen huge swaths of Latino businesses go down. Lots of small businesses in Appalachia as well. One of the areas that we have, and I've talked with most of you about this, is Community Development Financial Institutes, CDFIs. The federal government finally, and I got to give former Secretary Mnuchin some credit for this, and people like Senator Scott, who was a partner on this, we put up $12 billion to both help CDFIs who lend to disenfranchised communities and low and moderate income communities. We put up $12 billion, $3 billion in grants, $9 billion in tier one capital. With almost all my conversations with you guys or your folks underneath, you've always had some kind of regulatory reason why you can't help CDFIs or can't do more. I'm going to need you to lean in on this issue going forward, not just with CDFIs. I see each of what you guys have I read about almost each of your institutions in many of the daily political rags that come out talking about what your institution is doing to help disadvantage. What I don't see, though, is how do we get a quarterly update on those? I really think there is a moment in time right now where, whether it's working with CDFIs, whether it's a housing proposal that we've been working on, that I hope to get the chairman on board with as well, that would actually create a 20-year mortgage product for first-generation home buyers that would double the rate of wealth accumulation. And we've tried to price this with an interest rate subsidy that would, you could still make your $900 a month, you know, mortgage payment on a 30-year note, you'd actually be getting it on a 20-year note. Trust me on the math on this. We're going to need you to lean in. We're going to need you to be much more participatory. And again, no disrespect to the great ads that run about what each of your institutions are doing, but we got to really, I think, up our game. And if there are regulatory changes that need to be able to make sure you're able to put some tier one capital into some of these institutions, if there are other tools, I'd love to work with you. But when we've seen the kind of disruption that takes place, that's taken place in our economy over the last year, I think you guys can definitely be part of the solution. I appreciate some of the programs you put up, but I am asking you on a generic basis to be willing to engage with me and others who care about trying to do something on a systemic basis, both on the wealth gap in this country and on the access to capital issues. As we showed with PPP, well-intentioned program, but the number of minority or women-owned businesses that got those first rounds because they didn't have prior banking relationships was huge. And I know my time's about up, but I will be back to all of you on an individual basis and want to continue this conversation. Last thing I want to raise, though, I think I've got, trying to look desperately for the clock here. I think I've got one, what has not been raised yet, I think from many of our colleagues, is the questions around cyber. The country finally saw with the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack, what a challenge cyber can be. Think about the fact that the Russians were in 18,000 companies with SolarWinds attack. That if the Russians had decided to launch that kind of attack through SolarWinds rather than the one-off ransomware, it would have brought our economy to an end. You guys in the financial sector have done a pretty good job, but we're going to need you again, both weighing in on, I believe, the need for mandatory reporting requirements so that public and private sector can sort through this. Finance sector has got some of that. And we're also going to need to, and I know many of you have started looking at this, look at the challenges around cryptocurrencies, because as we all know, that is the ransomware payment methodology of choice. We worked with all of you and Senator Brown did leadership, Senator Crapo, on the issue of the anti-money laundering and beneficial ownership bill we put in place last year, again, with your help, but we're going to need to partner together on this issue around crypto and the issue around cyber. And since I can't see, Sherry, is my time up?
Your time has expired. Your time has expired.
All right, well, I will be back on both those, but thank you so much and look forward to visiting.
Thank you, Senator Warner. Thank you. Senator Shelby's recognized from Alabama for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Engineers who will soon help convert solar and wind energy into power, convert solar and wind energy into combat power.
Well, okay, we're going to convert solar and wind energy into combat power. The United States Navy is powered by nuclear energy. Our aircraft carriers, our submarines, they have nuclear reactors on board. Zero carbon emissions, by the way. Imagine if we had this little rock and we put it in some kind of reactor, made it heat up a lot, and then it provided carbon-free energy for like 25 years. Who wrote this speech for you? Let's see if it gets any better.
Any Marine today,
Okay, I'll ask Marine.
would she rather carry 20 pounds of
Very
batteries
inclusive.
or a rolled up solar panel? And I am positive she will tell you a solar panel,
You're positive?
and so would he.
Oh, so would he? Oh, okay. We don't carry 20 pounds of batteries in the field anymore. That's like decades old technology. Here's the second thing. The reason we carry batteries is because we need to power our gear at all times, including, by the way, at night. We're not going to have some like yoga mat of solar panels added to our already heavy pack just to make you feel good about green energy. Who wrote this for you? You ready to go for the big mish? Yeah, I think I'm good to go. Batteries, ammo, ready to rock. Well, why don't you add some solar panels to that mix, if you don't mind? Yeah, how about I don't? Well, I mean, clean energy, right? It's a new age in warfare, combat power. Yeah, no, I'm good, but thanks. It is a night mission, after all, so. And look, you want to put solar panels on top of a truck or something, fine. But this is the military. We're going to use gas, and we're going to use batteries, because that's what's actually reliable. Can we stop with the woke nonsense at every given turn? It is so unnecessary. It's a Naval Academy speech. Do something inspirational. Talk about leadership, whatever. But why do you have to make everything about woke nonsense?
Week of work with our constituents, the Senate reconvenes with a chance to refocus on the most important issues facing our folks back home. Already on multiple occasions this year, we've demonstrated that even a narrowly divided chamber is capable of taking productive bipartisan steps on serious issues. Wide majorities have come together to extend access to the critical PPP loans, invest in drinking water infrastructure, and equip the justice system to better combat hate crimes against Asian Americans. This week, the Senate is set to do the same on legislation regarding competition with China. And many of our colleagues are working hard to make further consensus possible on issues that have historically enjoyed bipartisan support, like transportation infrastructure. Remember, this sort of collaboration on serious priorities is what the American people insisted upon just last November. They elected a 50-50 Senate, shrunk Democrats' majority in the House, and took President Biden up on a promise to unite the country. So the question at the outset of this work period is how Democrats will use their razor-thin majority over the next few weeks. Unfortunately, the Democratic leader already signaled his answer a week ago by laying out a June agenda that is transparently designed to fail. As I understand it, Senate Democrats intend to focus this month on the demands of their radical base, exploiting the cause of pay fairness to send a windfall to trial lawyers, saddling hospitals, schools, and small businesses with crippling new legal burdens if they fail to keep pace with woke social norms, and opening an unprecedented new front in the left's war on the Second Amendment. As written, these are not proposals aimed at earning bipartisan support. They're not designed to clear the Senate's necessarily high bar for ending debate. Bizarrely, it appears they're being floated in order to illustrate that the bar is too high. After a spring in which the Senate has repeatedly passed mainstream legislation by wide margins, Democrats have decided that now is the time to argue that the legislative process is somehow broken. Let's not forget, the Democrats' poster child for why the Senate should change its rules is a bill that would forcibly change the rules for elections in every state in America. Let me say that again. Democrats' poster child for why the Senate should change its rules is a bill that would forcibly change the rules for elections in every state in America. Their marquee bill, S1, is such a brazen political power grab that the question isn't whether it could earn bipartisan support. The question is how wide the bipartisan opposition will be. This is the bill the Democratic leader has placed at the vanguard of his campaign to destroy the filibuster, even though multiple members of his own majority are now on the record objecting to it. So, Madam President, make no mistake, failing to sell reckless, wholesale changes to our democracy isn't proof that the guardrails should be removed. It's a reminder that they're there for a reason. The American people rightly expect a 50-50 Senate to spend its time finding common ground. But our Democratic colleagues seem to believe that the most important expectations are those of their far left fringe. They put forward an agenda that is designed to fail, and fail it will.
Under our administration, we accomplished 4 more years of everything. We took care of people at a level that nobody has ever thought possible. No president, and I say this and I don't get criticized, no president, or certainly very few, have accomplished what we accomplished in 4 years. We passed massive tax cuts and record-setting regulation cuts. We ended NAFTA and the NAFTA disaster, the worst trade deal ever made, and replaced it with USMCA, that's Mexico and Canada, who were both doing big numbers on our country, but not anymore. We withdrew from the job-killing Trans-Pacific Partnership, stood up to China like nobody has ever stood up, taking in billions and billions of dollars from China when we never took in 10 cents from China. That's what we were just saying with Sonny. We gave them a lot of money, 28 billion out of that money, and we had a lot left over. But Joe Biden is obliterating, he's just obliterating much of the hard-won success that we had. We had hard-won success. And that success is going to have to come back, or our country doesn't stand a chance. We're not respected anymore as a country. We're being laughed at all over the world. Afghanistan was the single most embarrassing event, in my opinion, that's ever happened to our country. And we're being laughed at all over the world. Last month, the economy added up to 1/3 the jobs that we expected. So we expected to have much better employment numbers, and it didn't work out too good. The unemployment rate for black Americans increased to a very, very high 8.8%. You know, with me, they were way down and going a lot lower. Gas prices in Georgia are now almost 100% higher than they were just last year. And you know, when gas prices go up like that, that's like a massive tax increase. That's bigger than a tax increase. Inflation is rampant, and shortages are becoming widespread for all products. Anybody having trouble getting products? Everybody probably. Meanwhile, Biden and Congressional Democrats are pushing the largest tax increase in the history of our country. We can't let that happen. The largest tax, it's going to kill everything that we built. And what's happening with our country, our foundation was so strong that they're able to get away with it for a little while, but eventually those foundations will start to crumble. Their socialist legislation would cost a mind-boggling $3.5 trillion, over $10,000 from every living American. If you want high taxes, fewer jobs, vote for the radical left Democrats. If you want low taxes, more and more and more jobs, fantastic income and freedom, vote for Republicans. That's what's happening. That's what's happening. Biden and the extreme left are also using every lever of the federal government to impose woke nonsense on every facet of American life, pushing toxic critical race theory into our children's classrooms and even into our military.
Nice for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Secretary Austin, General McKenzie, General Milley, for being here today. It's a very important hearing that we're having here. I appreciate the committee's urgency in making this happen. While there was bipartisan support for withdrawal from Afghanistan, there were differences in opinion on how that should have been conducted. Something we should all be able to agree on is that the withdrawal should have been conditions-based, and there should not have been any political motivation involved in this decision, which I don't think was the actual case. But, General Milley, I'd like to ask you, how often were you in contact with your Chinese counterpart discussing our evacuation efforts in Afghanistan?
Zero. Okay. And I agree with you, conditions-based.
General Milley, on August 18th, you were quoted as saying, the time frame of a rapid collapse was widely estimated and ranged from weeks to months, and even years following our departure. There was nothing that I or anyone else saw that indicated a collapse of this Army and this government in 11 days. Between the 18th and the 21st of June, in just 4 days, 21 districts in 9 provinces fell to the Taliban, and the Afghan security forces quickly surrendered and abandoned their post. This was an obvious beginning to the end of the Afghan army and to the Taliban takeover. General Milley, what were you doing during this time frame? Before you answer that question, let me tell you, you were just 2 days prior to when these provinces fell, you were here in our committee on June 23rd. You sat before this committee and you listed some of your concerns that we talked in depth about. One was defending critical race theory in the military, telling us you want to understand white rage, telling us how offended you were to be labeled as woke, and worrying about what caused American civilians to enter the Capitol on January 6th. I submit to you that perhaps we would not have had 13 service members and hundreds of Afghans killed, 18 service members wounded, and countless U.S. citizens abandoned and left as Taliban hostages if you had been more focused on your duty to this country instead of defending and pandering to the Biden administration's woke social experiment with the United States military, doing book interviews, and colluding with Chinese military officials. Yesterday, Senator Cotton asked you why you haven't resigned, and you said you were not going to resign just because the president didn't take your advice. Well, I submit to you, sir, that you should resign because of your dereliction of duty to this country and your inability to do your job and protect this country. It has become abundantly clear that the American people have completely lost confidence in your ability to do your job. General Milley, will you now resign?
I serve at the pleasure of the President, Mr. Jackson.
I yield back my time.
Thank you. And just for the record, on that date in question, what Chairman Milley was doing is he was appearing before this committee at our request and answering the questions that we asked him. And I appreciate his willingness and the willingness of all the leadership to appear before us. That is an incredibly important part of their job, and I don't want to leave any of you with the impression that we don't want you to do it, just because of questions like that. Mr. Cayley is recognized for 5 minutes.
What in the world is happening to our country? But that's what my Democratic colleagues want to do. They want to fund bureaucrats to go after the American people. They want to fund OSHA. They want to give more money to OSHA, increasing the max for OSHA penalty for repeat offenders of violating the president's illegal, unconstitutional vaccine mandate from $70,000 to $700,000, minimum penalty from $5,000 to $50,000, going after businesses who dare say they don't believe it is their role to tell their employees that they must get vaccinated. But in the infinite wisdom of this president, he thinks he has the power to go after the American people. Well, God bless the pilots at Southwest. God bless the employees out there saying no, saying you don't get to do that. But what do my Democratic colleagues want to do? They want to fund more bureaucrats to go after private citizens and private businesses who do not want to bow down to the edict of the President of the United States issuing an unlawful, illegal mandate. They want to fund more federal government restricting rights to work, $835 billion in welfare through the tax code, expand federal government control over local zoning, empowering the IRS, as my colleagues have already eloquently spoke about, and going after your ability to have the energy to fuel your businesses, fuel your homes, and making the American people subject to energy poverty. That's what our Democratic colleagues have in mind. And finally, giving billions of dollars to woke colleges, wealthy liberals, and the rest of the left's political base. That is the direction my Democratic colleagues want to take this country. I think the American people know this is the wrong direction. I urge my colleagues to oppose this disastrous legislation, and I thank the gentleman for yielding time.
The simple fact is, the Fed, under Chairman Powell's leadership, has forced millions of American families to choose whether to pay the mortgage or feed their families or fill up their gas tanks or heat their homes or maybe buy a couple extra Christmas presents. That is a failure. And while inflation is the Fed's worst failure under Chairman Powell, it's not their only failure. At a time when they cannot achieve their core mission of price stability, they are adopting ancillary missions like woke activism at the Fed. The Fed has joined an international effort devoted to greening the financial system, whatever that means. Fed branches around the country are even spreading critical race theory, claiming that terms like founding fathers and blacklist are biased, and sharing radical materials that claim, and this is a direct quote of some of the materials that Fed branches have shared, race-neutral policies uphold racism. Think about that. The Fed's core mission is to maintain price stability. And while they fail on that mission, they're teaching their employees that race-neutral policies are racist. Now, we might chuckle and shake our heads and have a good laugh when this kind of nonsense happened at Bard College or some other college campus. But now it's happening at the nation's central bank, which plays a role in determining whether we end up rich or poor. This mission creep is alarming, especially when the Fed is failing to fulfill its core mission. Now, I know many people have made excuses for the Fed, and they've defended Mr. Powell's tenure. They've said inflation was not his fault or primarily the Fed's fault, and it is true that the Democrats have been spending trillions of dollars this year that we don't have. But as Bill Parcells said about NFL teams, you are what your record says you are. The Fed's record is 6% inflation, the worst inflation in 30 years. Most Americans live in a world of accountability and consequences. the lack of which is one of the things they hate most about Washington. Failure in Washington is too often rewarded. The Fed has manifestly failed during Chairman Powell's tenure, further skewing our economy in favor of the wealthy while the working class suffers. There have to be consequences for this kind of failure. Jerome Powell is not the right choice to continue leading the Federal Reserve. Mr. Chairman, I yield the floor.
Hey everyone, I wanted to talk with you this evening about policy and specifically the funding of our military. When you are in the minority party, as the Republicans like us are right now, one way to be effective is to make sure the left and the rhinos out there know that I will challenge them at every turn and they will be held as accountable as possible. Back in September, I made a tough no vote on the National Defense Authorization Act, or the NDAA. At the time, I explained as much as I support our troops, there's simply too much woke crap in this bill for me to vote for it. Keep in mind, this is exactly how the left operates. They shove things into bills that have nothing to do with our military, and then they force us to vote on them thinking we will cave out of fear that it might turn into some attack ad or something. Well, tough luck. That's not how I roll. We didn't have the votes in the House. We had to count on the Senate. We had to pressure the Senate to clean this bill up. I worked with conservatives in Congress to say, we don't want our daughters in the draft. We don't want our military to have a department to combat extremism, whatever that means. We don't want gun confiscation laws where a mere allegation could strip legally owned weapons from our men and women in uniform. We don't want a woke military. We want a deadly force that protects us from our foreign enemies. This strategy worked. I was happy to vote for the revised NDAA that removed drafting our daughters, this Department of Combating Extremism, removed red flag laws, and it even removed the Colorado liberal land grabs that would have locked up 760,000 more acres of Colorado's 3rd Congressional District. This bill is still far from perfect, but I wanted you to know that we made progress even in the minority because conservatives, like yours truly, were willing to say no to the left's bullcrap and raise a stink about it. You aren't going to read about this in the paper, but just know the next time you hear the left or a rhino go off about me, remember our military is better off because I'm not afraid to say no. I'm not afraid to stick up for what's right, and I'm never going to go along just to get along. Thank you for all of your continued support. God bless you. God bless our men and women who serve our country selflessly, and God bless America.